Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined now by political scientist and author Lara M. Brown and Carl Cannon, who's stuck around to do this interview. So, Lara, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me here today.
So today, President Biden spoke at the Brookings Institution, really launching a defense of his economic record. He's got about 40 odd days left in the administration, but the public view of his economic performance is pretty dismal. The RCP average has him at 39% job approval rating on the economy, 35% approval rating on inflation. So, Lara, what did he talk about today, and what do you make of his legacy?
Well, I think there's two sides to this legacy. There is the reality and there is the perception. And the perception has dogged him really for over a year, since inflation began spiking in the wake of all of the new government spending that was enacted in the first year of his presidency. And so the perception is we have not, as a country, really managed to escape the worst problems of the pandemic. There is somehow this belief that we're still dealing with massive inflation, that jobs are maybe not necessarily as plentiful as they are, and that wage growth has been stagnant, even though the numbers tell us otherwise. President Biden did sort of invoke President Ronald Reagan in talking about the fact that facts are stubborn and facts are in his favor. But what is not in his favor and what has not been in his favor and seriously contributed to Vice President Harris losing the presidential campaign is the perception. This has been a difficult economy for most Americans according to the way they feel, not necessarily the way things are.
Carl, weigh in here. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I hear that. But Laura, there are some, he dealt so poorly with inflation when it first hit. The administration first denied it was happening. Then they said it was temporary. Then they said it was Vladimir Putin's fault. Then they said it was supply chain's fault. Then they said it was actually Donald Trump's fault, still 2 years into the administration. Finally, then they acknowledged it, but they said it won't last long. By the time they addressed it, opinion had solidified. It was like George H.W. Bush in the economy. People thought, this guy doesn't get what I'm going through. And so in that sense, it's a communications job, the presidency, and he didn't communicate very well at all. And he always prided himself on this, on getting what working class people were feeling. So I don't think it was an injustice. And the other thing, Laura, I'll say is that the still tough thing, and we don't talk about it much, is interest rates are too high. I don't blame President Biden directly for that, but they blame Jimmy Carter. I mean, the president sort of has to take that. But it's hard to buy a new car. It's hard to buy a house. You've got this whole generation of these young people, and partly they didn't vote for Biden the way they did the first time because they thought, well, this guy doesn't get what I'm going through. He doesn't understand my life.
Yeah, I mean, look, I will completely agree with you that I think President Biden did a horrible job in sort of selling his agenda. They came up with this idea of Bidenomics, and even though he talks about, building the economy essentially from the middle out and the bottom up, and he was very, strong in favor of the unions. He helped bail out the Teamsters pension. He walked picket lines. They passed a number of pieces of sort of legislation, whether it was the CHIPS Act or the infrastructure bill, all of which are going to continue to help this economy. He wasn't able to tell the American people what he did. And the thing that he did that Larry Summers acknowledged in the first year of the administration was that American Rescue Plan was just too big, and it was inflationary. And the reason why it was too big is because it came on the heels of a Republican lame duck, Congress and a Republican president passing an $800 billion, rescue plan that December. So, I mean, I do think all of this makes sense within the context of the whole 4 years. And Americans are not wrong for their perceptions, but it is also true that the Fed took too long to raise rates, and they've now, I would argue, to have taken too long to lower them. We have inflation sort of coming back, partly because I would argue that interest rates didn't come down fast enough, which would have actually spurred some of the housing and auto buying that you're talking about.
Yeah, Laura, I wonder, because I remember you and I talked about this before the election, and you were at that point telling me that, all these economic numbers were moving in Biden's direction. And that may be true. Apparently they didn't move there fast enough or enough to change the direction of the election. But is the irony here I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I mean, Trump is going to get a pretty good economy when he starts office, right? I mean, the stock market's going through the roof and jobs are being created. Inflation is down. I mean, so when people stand back, and that's why I wanted to talk about his legacy a little bit, in 5-10 years, when people start writing the history books of this administration, will they remember it differently than people are feeling about it right now?
Well, I think they will. I mean, but I think Carl's right to compare this to George H.W. Bush, that, there is a sense that he wasn't on the ball with respect to the economy. And I think that will persist for Biden in the near future, even though we know now, right, that the economy was starting to kind of pull out of recession, in that early time of, Clinton's presidency. And we also know that Biden is handing over an economy that is very strong. And this is why I think Biden invoked Ronald Reagan, because he wants people in the coming years to say, look, here was Biden's economy, the envy of the world, according to The Economist. And here's what Trump has now created for us. And if tariffs come and interest rates have to spike again, and all of a sudden we are seeing a worse job situation, people are going to say, Trump did not make America great. He actually made the economy worse.
Well, the jobs report for November was dismal. So I'm not sure the jobs picture is what we wanted. Unemployment's ticked up to 4.3%. The labor participation rate isn't where we want it. I'm not sure we're out of the woods yet, but Laura, you reminded me of something. When George H.W. Bush, all that summer, he's running for re-election. He's running against Bill Clinton. And Clinton was the man with the plan. Remember, putting people first. He had this book. It was like a normal campaign document. It flew off the shelves like a bestseller. It was a very interesting campaign. But there was the jobs report came out. I think it was August, and the numbers came out, and inflation was down. Employment was. It was clear we were out of the recession. And Bush said something to the pool. He was jogging. He wasn't normally nasty to the press like Trump is. And he says, I'd like to see the Washington Post spin this or something like that. Well, they did. The Washington Post said all the numbers are good. But anyway, it didn't matter what the Washington Post wrote. By that time, people had already made up their mind about Bush. And it didn't matter that this recession ended 3 months or 4 months before the election. People decided they didn't want him to have a second term hand on the economy. And I guess what I'm saying is I think that happened to Biden. At some point, the American people tuned him out because he didn't respond in the moment the way they expected or wanted.
Yeah. And I do think that, there was an expectation that Biden was going to be a transitional president. He had somewhat committed to that. And I do think Americans were frustrated because there was this feeling like, why is he still going on? So I also think that they stopped listening to him, which inhibited his ability to communicate his message. I mean, I will stand every single day on the fact that I do think Vice President Harris ran a flawless campaign. I think she brought that campaign and essentially the vote to near a tie at the presidential level. I do not believe if Biden had stayed in the race that he would have done any better. And in fact, I'm certain he would have done worse. And so I do think that the problem was it was just too little, too late, and there were too many messages that were not kind of heard and received. And there was so much nostalgia and sort of memory hole forgetting about the pandemic that no one remembered that actually 4 years ago, people were very bad off.
Yeah. You're listening to Real Clear Politics. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've got Lara Brown with us. We've got about a minute left here, Lara. And I'm just curious, sum up how you think, because you've written about a number of presidents, how you think the world will view Joe Biden overall. You got about a minute. What do you think they'll think of him in 10 years, say?
I think Biden is going to be seen as both a successful legislative president and a somewhat successful foreign policy president. I think he will be credited for bringing international institutions and allies back into the fold and bringing them back closer to America. But I think that there is a reality that Afghanistan withdrawal, even if he says it wasn't his fault precisely, the execution took place under his administration. And I don't think he's really been able to get out from the shadow of that really during his entire presidency.
Well, great. We're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been with Carl Cannon and Lara Brown. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great evening.